He was Julian Croft, the king of Silicon Valley, standing on stage at the most exclusive gala of the year. In his hand, a glass of champagne. In his eyes, a secret burning desire for his mistress Isabella, who watched him from the crowd. He was about to raise a toast that would set their secret world on fire, a public declaration disguised as a business platitude. He thought he controlled everything: his billion-dollar company, his public image, and his quiet, pregnant wife at home. But what he didn't know was that his wife wasn't at home. She was in the room, and she didn't just have a seat at the table. She owned the entire venue. His whole world was about to come crashing down, live in front of everyone who mattered. The Croft penthouse on the 80th floor of Park Avenue's most prestigious tower was less a home and more a museum of success. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed a panoramic view of Manhattan, a kingdom Julian Croft felt he had personally conquered. Every surface was polished marble or gleaming chrome. Every piece of art was an investment, and every room was a testament to his ruthless ascent in the world of tech finance. His company, Croft Innovations, was the darling of Wall Street, and at 35, Julian was the sun around which his universe revolved. His wife, Emma Vance, moved through this sterile palace with a quiet grace that was often mistaken for fragility. She was beautiful in a classic, understated way that photographers for magazines like Vogue and Town and Country adored. To the outside world, she was the perfect accessory to a man like Julian, elegant, supportive, and from a background of respectable, if faded, old money. What the world didn't see was the steel in her spine, forged not in boardrooms, but in a childhood spent watching her own family's legacy get mismanaged into near obscurity. She knew the precariousness of wealth and the importance of a foundation built on more than just fluctuating stock prices. Their marriage, once a passionate partnership, had slowly cooled into a contractual arrangement. Julian was consumed by his work, his phone a permanent extension of his hand. Their conversations had become transactional, revolving around schedules, public appearances, and the renovations on their Hamptons estate. Emma had tried for years to breach the wall he'd built around himself to find the man she'd fallen in love with, the ambitious, brilliant visionary who had once looked at her like she was the only person in the world. Now he looked through her. The news of her pregnancy 6 months ago had caused a brief ripple in their stagnant waters. Julian had been ecstatic, but in a proprietary way. A Crofter, he'd declared as if ordering a new supercar. He'd hired the best doctors, a nutritionist, a prenatal yoga instructor, and a team to design the most opulent nursery imaginable. He was managing the pregnancy like a project launch, all logistics and no emotion. He never asked how she was feeling. He never placed a hand on her growing belly just to feel his child move. He was present in every material way and absent in every way that mattered. This evening was a perfect example. The annual Starlight Children's Foundation Gala was the social event of the season, a night where New York's elite gathered to out-donate and outdress one another. For Julian, it was a prime networking opportunity. For Emma, it was an obligation. "Are you wearing the emeralds?" Julian asked, not looking up from his phone as he adjusted his custom Tom Ford tuxedo. "The ones from the Christie's auction. They'll match the green in your dress." Emma stood before the full-length mirror, her hand resting on the gentle curve of her stomach, beneath the flowing emerald silk of her gown. "I was thinking of wearing my mother's pearls," she said softly. "They feel more appropriate." "Nonsense," he dismissed, finally glancing at her. The emeralds make a statement. We need to make a statement tonight. Daniel Carter from Viridian Capital will be there. I need him to see that we're a power couple, that the Croft brand is stronger than ever. We. He always used that word when it served him. She didn't argue. It was pointless. Instead, she walked to their vault and retrieved the cold, heavy emerald necklace. As she fastened the clasp, she met her own eyes in the mirror. A stranger looked back at her, a woman playing a part in a life that no longer felt like her own. The loneliness was a physical ache, a cold void that even the impending birth of her child couldn't fully fill. As they rode down in the private elevator, Julian was already strategizing. Okay, so when we get there, I'll handle the press line. You just smile and look radiant. I'll make the introductions to Carter. Remember, his wife's name is Brenda. She loves horses. Mention the polo club. Emma simply nodded, her gaze fixed on the flashing floor numbers. She felt like a ghost, an invisible passenger in her own life, while her husband piloted them towards yet another performance. She had a secret, though. A small, carefully guarded piece of herself that Julian knew nothing about. It was a seed of independence she had planted years ago, a project born from her determination to never be as vulnerable as her parents had been. It was her safety net, her silent rebellion. And tonight, she had a sickening feeling that she was going to need it. Isabella Rossi was everything Emma was not. Where Emma was classic elegance, Isabella was explosive charisma. She was the head of strategic communications at Croft Innovations, a title she'd earned not just with a sharp mind, but with a predator's instinct for opportunity. She had identified Julian Croft as her ultimate prize from the moment she walked into his office. She saw his ambition, but she also saw his ego, a massive, glittering, and ultimately fragile thing, and she knew exactly how to feed it. Their affair hadn't started in a sordid, cliched way. It began in the intellectual fire of late-night brainstorming sessions and transatlantic business flights. Isabella challenged him, pushed him, and most importantly, mirrored his own self-importance back at him. She looked at him with a raw, undisguised admiration that he hadn't seen from his wife in years. She made him feel like a god, while Emma, with her quiet intelligence and subtle questions, sometimes made him feel merely mortal. She doesn't get it, does she? Isabella would murmur, her crimson-nailed fingers tracing the rim of her wine glass as they sat in a secluded corner of a private club after a triumphant deal closing. Emma, she doesn't understand the pressure you're under, the sacrifices you make. Julian, basking in the glow of her worship, would sigh. She's from a different world. She thinks signing a check at a charity lunch is doing her part. She doesn't understand what it takes to build something, to fight for it every single day. It was a narrative Isabella carefully cultivated. She painted Emma as a relic, a beautiful but outdated piece of his old life, while she was the future. She was his true partner, the one who could stand beside him, not just on a red carpet, but in the trenches of corporate warfare. Their trysts were reckless, a testament to Julian's soaring arrogance. They used the company's corporate apartment in south of Houston Street, a place so obviously tied to him that it was an act of pure hubris. He bought her gifts, a Cartier bracelet, a limited edition Dior handbag, justifying them as performance bonuses on company expense reports that he personally approved. He was so confident in his power, so certain of his control, that he believed himself untouchable. The plan for the Starlight Gala was Isabella's masterpiece of manipulation. She knew Julian was being honored with the Innovator of the Year award. It was her idea that he use his acceptance speech to subtly cement her importance. "Don't mention it to me, of course," she'd said, her voice a seductive purr over the phone a week earlier. "But you could talk about inspiration, about a new dynamic partnership that has invigorated your vision. Everyone in our inner circle will know who you mean. It will be our secret shouted from the rooftops." Julian loved it. It was daring a thrill. It was a way of acknowledging her, of binding her to him in the most public of forums without raising any overt suspicion. He was so caught up in the fantasy and the intoxicating game of it all that he failed to see the danger. He failed to see anything beyond his own reflection in Isabella's adoring eyes. A few days before the gala, he made a critical mistake. After an afternoon tryst at the south of Houston Street apartment, Isabella had playfully sprayed some of her signature perfume, a rare and potent scent from a niche Parisian perfumer called Sang Noir, onto his cashmere scarf. "So you can think of me on your flight to London," she'd whispered. Julian, distracted by an urgent call from his London office, had forgotten about the scarf. He'd arrived home late, tossing it onto the valet tray in their shared dressing room, before heading straight to his home office. He didn't see Emma pause as she walked past, her brow furrowing. She recognized the scent. It wasn't hers. It wasn't the generic scent of a flight attendant or a colleague. It was distinctive, expensive, and deeply intimate. It was the scent of another woman. For a moment, the polished marble floor seemed to sway beneath her feet. It wasn't a suspicion anymore. It was a cold, hard certainty that settled in her chest like a shard of ice. Her husband, the father of her unborn child, was having an affair. The quiet sadness she had lived with for years instantly hardened into something else, a cold, crystalline fury. She picked up the scarf, holding the evidence in her hand. The ghost in the gilded cage finally had a reason to fight back. The scent on the scarf was the first thread. Emma, methodical and precise, knew that pulling it would unravel the entire tapestry of lies Julian had woven. She didn't cry. She didn't scream or throw things. The Vances, for all their financial mismanagement, had instilled in her one invaluable trait: composure under fire. Panic was a luxury she couldn't afford. She began her investigation with the quiet, devastating efficiency of a forensic accountant. The scarf was the starting point. The perfume Sang Noir was her first clue. A quick search revealed there was only one boutique in New York that sold it, a ridiculously exclusive shop on Madison Avenue. The next morning, dressed in elegant but unassuming clothes, she visited the store. Feigning interest in the fragrance, she casually asked the sales associate if it had become popular recently. "Oh, it's having a moment," the woman gushed. "A top executive over at Croft Innovations bought a bottle just last month. A stunning brunette, Isabella Rossi. She said it was her new signature." The name hit Emma with the force of a physical blow. Isabella Rossi. The brilliant, ambitious head of communications Julian couldn't stop praising. The woman he claimed was essential to the company's new global strategy. Emma had met her twice at company functions. She remembered the woman's sharp intelligence and the way her eyes lingered on Julian a second too long. Her heart hammered against her ribs, but her face remained a mask of polite interest. She thanked the associate and left the store. The betrayal was no longer an abstract concept. It had a name and a face. Back in the sterile silence of the penthouse, she moved to the next step. Julian's hubris was her greatest weapon. He believed she was technologically illiterate, someone who used her tablet only for online shopping and charity correspondence. He had no idea she'd taken advanced courses in data security and digital forensics, a private hobby born from her interest in protecting her own investments. She started with the family's shared cloud account, which Julian used carelessly for backing up his devices. Tucked away in a mislabeled folder was a treasure trove of receipts, expense reports from fancy restaurants she'd never been to, hotel bookings for business trips on weekends, and most damningly the credit card statement with a charge from the Madison Avenue perfume boutique. But there was another charge that caught her eye, a recurring monthly payment for a corporate apartment in south of Houston Street. An apartment she'd never heard of. The pieces were clicking into place with sickening speed. She felt a wave of nausea that had nothing to do with her pregnancy. This wasn't a fleeting mistake. This was a systematic, calculated deception, a parallel life. That evening she knew she needed help. Not a divorce lawyer, not yet. She needed counsel. She called Mr. Alistair Finch, her family's long-time advisor, and the executor of the trust her grandfather had established for her decades ago. Alistair was a shrewd, old-world gentleman who had seen Emma grow up. He was fiercely loyal and had always been wary of Julian's flashy ambition. They met the next day at a discreet tea room at the Carlyle. Emma laid out her evidence calmly and logically, her voice never wavering. She presented printouts of the receipts, the name of the mistress, the address of the apartment. Alistair listened without interruption, his steepled fingers pressed against his lips. When she finished, he didn't offer condolences. He offered strategy. "What is it you want, Emma?" he asked, his voice gentle but firm. "I want to protect myself and my child," she stated, her gaze unwavering. "But I will not be a victim. I will not be quietly discarded. He has built his empire on an image of stability and power, an image I helped him create. I will not allow him to humiliate me." Alistair nodded slowly. "Your grandfather was a brilliant man, Emma. He foresaw a day when you might need your own resources entirely separate from any man. The Vance Trust isn't just a portfolio of stocks. Do you remember the real estate acquisitions we made 8 years ago? The ones in downtown Manhattan?" Emma's mind raced. She vaguely remembered signing papers for a series of commercial property investments, a diversification strategy Alistair had strongly recommended. She'd been busy with the wedding plans and had trusted him implicitly. "One of those acquisitions," Alistair continued, a faint, knowing smile on his lips, "was a struggling but historically significant hotel. A place with a grand ballroom, impeccable service, and a need for a silent partner to fund a complete renovation. A partner who wanted no public association with the venue, preferring to let the management company take the credit." The world seemed to slow down. Emma stared at him, understanding dawning in her eyes. "The Serafina," she whispered. "The very same," Alistair confirmed. "The venue for the Starlight Gala on Saturday. You, my dear, are the sole anonymous owner. Julian is about to accept an award in a room full of his peers in a building that belongs to the wife he is so carelessly betraying." For the first time in days, Emma felt a tremor of something other than pain. It was power. Cold, clear, and absolute. A plan began to form in her mind, a script for a drama of Julian's own making. He wanted to make a statement at the gala. So did she. She looked at Alistair, her eyes glinting with a newfound steely resolve. "Get me the event organizers, Alistair. I need to make a last-minute change to the speaker's schedule." The grand entrance of the Serafina Hotel was a maelstrom of flashing camera bulbs and velvet ropes. Black town cars lined the curb, depositing New York's financial and social royalty onto a plush red carpet. The air buzzed with the sound of forced laughter, air kisses, and the rustle of couture gowns. It was a perfectly orchestrated symphony of wealth and influence. Julian Croft stepped out of his Maybach and into the light, a conquering hero returning to his court. He was electric, his smile wood and confident, his eyes scanning the crowd for important faces. He turned and offered a hand to Emma, a perfunctory gesture of a man playing his part. Emma emerged, and a hush fell over the photographers. Dressed in the emerald silk gown with her mother's simple elegant pearls at her throat, instead of the ostentatious emeralds, she was a vision of serene dignity. Her pregnancy was not something she hid, but something she wore with a quiet, regal pride. To the photographers, she was the epitome of grace. To Julian, she was the perfect prop. "There's Carter," he murmured, steering her towards a portly man with a booming laugh. "Remember, his wife's name is Brenda. Horses." Emma smiled placidly, allowing him to lead her. She played her role to perfection. She laughed at the right jokes, inquired about polo ponies with practiced sincerity, and accepted compliments on her glow with a gentle nod. All the while her mind was a whirlwind of cold calculation. She scanned the cavernous ballroom, not as a guest, but as an owner inspecting her property. She noted the placement of the cameras for the live stream, the sightlines from the stage, to the various VIP tables, the location of the exits. She saw Isabella Rossi across the room. She was holding court near the main bar, dressed in a stunning form-fitting crimson gown that screamed for attention. She looked like a victor, her laughter loud and confident, her eyes constantly flicking towards Julian. At one point, their gazes met across the crowded room. Julian gave a subtle, almost imperceptible nod. Isabella's lips curved into a smug, triumphant smile. They thought they were so clever, so discreet. They had no idea they were actors in a play where the final act had been rewritten. Emma excused herself, telling Julian she needed a moment to rest her feet. He was so engrossed in his conversation with a tech billionaire that he barely registered her departure. She didn't go to the ladies' lounge. Instead, she slipped through a discreet door marked "Private" and entered the backstage labyrinth of the ballroom. The frantic energy of the event staff was a stark contrast to the polished calm of the gala. Headset-wearing stage managers and scurrying assistants rushed past her. One of them, a young woman with a clipboard, stopped short. "Ma'am, you can't be back here. It's all right," a familiar voice said. Mr. Alistair Finch, looking distinguished in his tuxedo, stepped out from the shadows. "She's with me." He turned to Emma. "Everything is in place. The event host, MC David Miller, has been briefed. He knows to call you to the stage directly after Julian's award. The teleprompter is loaded with your speech." Emma took a deep breath, her hand instinctively going to her belly. The baby kicked a small, reassuring flutter. This wasn't just for her anymore. And the house lights, the cameras. Camera 3 will have a tight shot on Julian's table. Camera 4 will be on Ms. Rossi. Alistair said, his voice grimly satisfied. "We will capture every moment. Are you certain you can do this, Emma?" She looked out through a small gap in the curtain, her eyes finding Julian. He was laughing, basking in the adoration of his peers, a king in his castle. But it wasn't his castle. It was hers. He built his world on a foundation of lies. She said, her voice low and steady. "Tonight, I'm simply going to show him the cracks." She smoothed down her dress, the picture of composure, and prepared to watch the first act of her husband's public downfall. After the main course was cleared and the dessert plates were set, the lights in the grand ballroom dimmed. A spotlight found the stage where the evening's host, David Miller, a charming local news anchor, tapped the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen," his smooth voice boomed, "tonight we have celebrated the incredible work of the Starlight Children's Foundation. And now it is my great honor to present our final award of the evening, the Innovator of the Year Award." A polite, expectant applause rippled through the room. This year's recipient is a man whose name is synonymous with success. David continued reading from his cue cards. A visionary who has reshaped the landscape of financial technology. He is the founder and CEO of the unstoppable Croft Innovations. Please join me in welcoming to the stage Mr. Julian Croft. The applause was thunderous this time. Julian rose from his seat, basking in it. He kissed Emma on the cheek, a chaste, performative gesture for the cameras, and whispered, "Watch this." He strode to the stage with the easy confidence of a man who believed the world was his for the taking. He accepted the heavy crystal award, shaking David's hand and giving the audience a dazzling smile. He waited for the applause to die down, his eyes sweeping the room, taking in the sea of powerful faces all focused on him. He felt invincible. "Thank you." He began, his voice resonating with practiced charisma. "Thank you, David, and thank you to the board of the Starlight Foundation. It's a true honor." He launched into a well-rehearsed speech, thanking his mentors, his board of directors, and his unbelievably talented team. Emma watched from her table, her heart beating a slow, steady rhythm. She kept her expression neutral, a mask of wifely pride. She could feel the eyes of those at her table, the other corporate spouses watching her, their faces a mixture of envy and admiration. They had no idea. Julian was nearing the end of his speech. He set the award down on the lectern and picked up his glass of champagne. "Success is not a solitary journey," he said, his voice dropping to a more intimate, conspiratorial tone. "It requires vision, yes, it requires relentless hard work. But more than anything, it requires inspiration. It requires finding a spark that can light a fire." He paused, letting the words hang in the air. His eyes left the general audience and scanned the room until they locked directly onto Isabella Rossi's. Her face was illuminated, her red dress a beacon in the dimly lit room. She leaned forward, her expression rapt, a triumphant glint in her eyes. This was her moment. "Recently," Julian continued, a small, secret smile playing on his lips, "I've been fortunate enough to forge a new dynamic partnership. A partnership that has challenged me, pushed me, and brought a level of innovation and passion to my work that I haven't felt in years." A subtle murmur went through the crowd. Those in Julian's inner circle, his executives, his rivals, the gossip columnists who knew the whispers understood the code. Daniel Carter, Julian's CFO, sitting at the table, shifted uncomfortably in his seat, a look of deep unease on his face. He knew about the affair and had warned Julian to be discreet. This was the opposite of discreet. This was a public declaration. Emma didn't flinch. She kept her serene smile perfectly in place, even as she felt 100 pairs of eyes discreetly flicker towards her, gauging her reaction. They were looking for a crack, a hint of humiliation. She gave them nothing. Julian raised his glass higher, his gaze still fixed on his mistress. "This partnership is the future. So I want to propose a toast," he declared, his voice ringing with arrogance and misplaced passion. "To bold new beginnings, to the partnerships that truly inspire us, to the future." He drank deeply from his glass. Isabella, seated at her table across the room, discreetly raised her own glass in a silent, reciprocal toast. Her victory felt complete. She had been acknowledged in front of the world by the man she was going to take from his clueless, pregnant wife. Julian turned his speech finished, expecting another wave of thunderous applause. But the response was more muted this time, colored by confusion and whispered speculation. The air in the room had shifted. It was thick with tension, with the delicious, scandalous drama that the city's elite craved more than any dessert. Julian, high on his own audacity, was oblivious. He walked off the stage, feeling like the king of the world, completely unaware that his coronation was about to become an execution. As Julian returned to his table, flush with victory, David Miller stepped back to the lectern. The applause for Julian faded, replaced by an expectant silence. "Thank you, Julian, for that passionate speech," David said, with just a hint of professional ambiguity. "And now, ladies and gentlemen, we have a surprise addition to our program. It's not often we get to hear from the people who work tirelessly behind the scenes, the silent patrons who make an evening like this, in a venue like this, possible." Julian, who had just taken a sip of water, paused, his brow furrowed in confusion. This wasn't on the schedule. He glanced around, looking for a cue. The Serafina Grand Ballroom is more than just a venue. It's a New York landmark, recently restored to its breathtaking glory. David continued, his voice building with theatrical flair. "Tonight we are privileged to have the quiet benefactor, the driving force behind that restoration, and the sole owner of this magnificent establishment with us. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in giving a warm welcome to the stage, Ms. Emma Vance." A collective audible gasp swept through the ballroom. It was a sound of pure, unadulterated shock. 1,000 heads swiveled in unison, first toward the stage, then to Julian's table, then back again. Julian froze. The smile melted from his face, replaced by a mask of slack-jawed disbelief. His mind short-circuited. Emma Owner. It wasn't possible. He looked at his wife, truly looked at her for the first time all night, and saw not the quiet, compliant woman he thought he knew, but a stranger with eyes of polished steel. Across the room, Isabella Rossi's triumphant expression curdled into one of horrified confusion. The color drained from her face, her crimson dress suddenly looking garish and cheap. The blood was roaring in her ears. Emma rose from her seat with a poise that defied the chaos erupting around her. She gave Julian a small, cold smile that didn't reach her eyes, a smile that said, "You have no idea what's coming." She walked towards the stage, her every step deliberate and graceful. The spotlight followed her, bathing her in a halo of golden light. The room was so quiet, you could hear the clinking of ice in a forgotten cocktail glass. She reached the lectern and adjusted the microphone, her hand steady. She didn't look at Julian or Isabella. She looked out at the audience, at the powerful men and women whose respect Julian so desperately craved. "Good evening." She began, her voice calm and clear, carrying to every corner of the vast room. "I apologize for the unscheduled interruption. I've always believed that the best work is done quietly, without the need for applause. But tonight, I was moved by the theme of partnership." Her eyes flickered for a brief second toward Julian. He looked like he'd been turned to stone. "My late grandfather, a man of great integrity, taught me that a true partnership is built on a foundation of trust, loyalty, and absolute transparency," she continued. "It's not about public declarations or grand gestures. It's about the quiet, unseen work of building something solid, something that can withstand any storm. It's about protecting your investments, and more importantly, your integrity." Every word was a perfectly sharpened dart, aimed with lethal precision. She never raised her voice, but her message was a thunderclap. The audience was transfixed, hanging on her every syllable. This was no longer a charity gala. It was a public execution, and they had front-row seats. "In honor of my grandfather's legacy," Emma announced, her voice ringing with newfound authority, "I am pleased to announce the creation of a new initiative funded by the profits of this hotel. It will be called the Vance Grant for Integrity in Business. It will award seed money to young entrepreneurs whose business models are predicated not just on profit, but on ethical conduct and transparent partnerships." The implication was brutally clear. She was creating a foundation that stood for everything Julian and Isabella's sordid affair did not. Then she delivered the final devastating blow. She looked directly at Daniel Carter, Julian's CFO, and the representative of their largest investors. The Vance Trust has always been a silent but significant investor in a number of promising ventures, she said, her voice dropping slightly. "We believe in backing winners. We also believe in cutting our losses when a partner's vision no longer aligns with our principles of trust and stability. As of tomorrow morning, my advisors will be in touch with the board of Croft Innovations to discuss a full re-evaluation of our financial position and all associated contracts." She paused, letting the weight of her words settle like a shroud over the room. She had just publicly threatened to pull millions of dollars of backing capital that was intrinsically tied to her family name and influence, a connection Julian had leveraged for years while conveniently forgetting its source. She gave the audience a final serene smile. "Thank you for your time. Please enjoy the rest of your evening." And with that, she turned and walked off the stage, leaving behind a scene of absolute carnage. The whispers exploded into a roar. Photographers, smelling the biggest society scandal in a decade, rushed forward, their flashes firing like machine guns. Julian was left sitting at his table alone, the crystal award in front of him looking like a tombstone. His face was ashen, his empire, his reputation, and his life crumbling to dust around him, all in the time it took for his quiet, underestimated wife to give a speech. The moment Emma stepped off the stage, the carefully constructed world of Julian Croft shattered into a million pieces. The ballroom moments ago, a picture of elite decorum, devolved into chaos. Society columnists were frantically typing into their phones, their eyes wide with predatory glee. Investors were huddled in tight, panicked circles, their voices low and urgent. Julian jolted from his stupor, scrambled to his feet. He had to get to Emma to fix this, to manage it. He pushed through the crowd, his face a mask of desperate fury. "Emma!" he called out, his voice raw. As he reached the edge of the stage, two large, impeccably dressed men stepped in his path. They were part of the hotel's executive security team, and their expressions were polite but unyielding. "Mrs. Vance does not wish to be disturbed, Mr. Croft," one of them said, his voice calm but absolute. He looked past them and saw Emma flanked by Alistair Finch, disappearing through a private exit. She didn't look back. His eyes darted around the room, searching for Isabella. He found her being swarmed by a pack of reporters. "Ms. Rossi, were you the dynamic partnership Mr. Croft was referring to? Is it true you're the reason for the Croft divorce? What's your comment on Mrs. Vance's announcement?" Isabella, usually so composed and media-savvy, was utterly overwhelmed. Her face was pale, her eyes darting around like a trapped animal. Her dream of a public acknowledgement had become her worst nightmare. This wasn't a stepping stone. It was a cliff. Humiliation washed over Julian in a sickening wave. He was trapped in the middle of the ballroom, the spotlight of 100 conversations burning into him. The man who had been crowned king moments before was now a public spectacle, a fool stripped bare in the court he thought he commanded. His Innovator of the Year award sat abandoned on his table, a worthless piece of glass. He turned and fled. Pushing past shocked onlookers, escaping into the cold Manhattan night, a titan reduced to a fugitive from his own life. The next morning, the fallout was swift and brutal. The story was everywhere: the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, and every gossip blog on the internet. The Serafina speech, they called it. Wife of tech mogul owns venue torpedoes, husband's empire at Gala. The stock for Croft Innovations plummeted in pre-market trading. Daniel Carter, the CFO, called an emergency board meeting. By noon, the board had invoked the morality clause in Julian's contract and demanded his immediate resignation. The investors Emma had so calmly addressed were pulling out in droves, spooked by the instability and the public scandal. A courier arrived at the silent, empty penthouse that afternoon. Julian, who hadn't slept, signed for the envelope with a trembling hand. Inside were divorce papers filed that morning, citing adultery. Also inside was a detailed financial statement prepared by Alistair Finch's firm. It outlined with surgical precision every asset tied to the Vance Trust and Emma's personal holdings. It turned out that the seed money for Croft Innovations, which Julian had always claimed he'd raised himself, had been funneled to him through a blind LLC controlled by Emma's trust. He hadn't just cheated on his wife. He had betrayed his primary and most foundational investor. He collapsed onto a white leather sofa, the papers scattering around him. The penthouse, once his monument to success, now felt like a pristine, lonely prison. He had catastrophically underestimated Emma. He had seen her as a beautiful, gentle accessory to his life, when in reality she had been the architect of its foundation. He had mistaken her quietness for weakness, her grace for submission. Weeks later, a heavily pregnant Emma met with Alistair in the sun-drenched library of her new home, a historic brownstone she was renovating. She was reviewing the plans for the Vance grant, her face calm and focused. The divorce was being finalized, with Julian putting up no fight, utterly broken. Isabella Rossi had been fired and had disappeared from the New York social scene, her career in ruins. "Are you happy, Emma?" Alistair asked gently. Emma placed a hand on her belly, a soft, genuine smile gracing her lips for the first time in years. "I'm at peace, Alistair," she replied. "I've found my voice. I'm building something that matters, something for my child. A legacy built not on stock prices and public image, but on strength, integrity, and the knowledge that you should never, ever underestimate a quiet woman." She was no longer a ghost in a gilded cage. She was the master of her own house, and she was finally free. 5 years had passed since the night of the Starlight Gala. The seasons in New York had turned, trends had come and gone, and the scandal that had once been the talk of the city had faded into the annals of high society lore. For Emma Vance, those 5 years had been a period of quiet, deliberate reconstruction. The sterile Park Avenue penthouse was a distant memory, replaced by a warm, inviting brownstone in the West Village. Sunlight streamed through tall windows, illuminating rooms filled not with investment art, but with children's drawings, shelves overflowing with books, and the comfortable clutter of a life well lived. The silence here was not the oppressive emptiness of her former home, but the peaceful hum of contentment, occasionally punctuated by the joyous laughter of her 4.5-year-old daughter, Lillian Grace Croft. Lily was the center of Emma's universe, a bright, inquisitive child with her mother's thoughtful grey eyes and a spark of the ambition that had once defined her father. Emma was determined to raise her in a world built on the principles she now championed publicly. The Vance grant for integrity in business had become a major force for good in the startup world, a coveted prize that signaled not just financial viability, but ethical fortitude. Emma Vance was no longer known as Julian Croft's wronged wife. She was a respected philanthropist, a shrewd investor, and a formidable figure in her own right. The name on her office door simply read, E. Vance. Her life was ordered calm and fulfilling. The ghosts of the past had been laid to rest, or so she believed. The call came on a crisp autumn afternoon. Emma was in her home office reviewing applications for the next round of grants when her private line buzzed. The caller ID showed a name she hadn't seen in years. Daniel Carter, Julian's former CFO and one-time friend. A man who had been a silent witness to Julian's rise and a casualty of his spectacular fall. Curiosity warred with a cold knot of apprehension in her stomach. She let it ring 3 times before answering, her voice perfectly level. Emma Vance. Emma, it's Daniel Carter. I hope I'm not disturbing you. His voice was different, hesitant, frayed at the edges, stripped of the easy confidence she remembered. Daniel, it's been a long time, she said, her tone polite but guarded. To what do I owe the pleasure? There was a pause, and she could hear him take a shaky breath. I'm calling about Julian. The knot in her stomach tightened. She had made it a point to never ask about him. She knew the basics from public records, the forced resignation, the fire sale of his assets to settle debts, his retreat from public life. He had effectively vanished. I see, she said coolly. He's not well, Emma. Daniel said the words tumbling out in a rush. He's been living quietly in a small town in Oregon for the last few years. He has pancreatic cancer. The prognosis is not good. A few months, maybe. Emma felt the air leave her lungs, but her expression remained unchanged. The news didn't bring her satisfaction or sorrow. It was a sterile fact, an epilogue to a story she had closed long ago. I'm sorry to hear that. She said the words a social nicety devoid of real emotion. He knows he has no right to ask for anything. Daniel continued, sensing her reserve. God knows he forfeited every right he ever had. But he's asking Emma. He's asking to see you. And he's asking to see his daughter. Just once. The request landed like a stone in the tranquil pool of her life. Lillian. He wanted to see Lily. A fierce, protective anger, an emotion she hadn't felt in years, surged through her. No, she said the word as sharp and cold as a shard of ice. Absolutely not. He gave up the right to be her father the moment he chose to betray his family. I will not expose my daughter to that man's chaos and regret. The answer is no. I understand, Daniel said, his voice heavy with defeat. I told him you'd say that. I'm sorry to have bothered you. She hung up the phone, her hand trembling slightly. She walked to the window, looking down at the street where children were playing in the fallen leaves. Lily would be home from her preschool soon, full of stories about finger painting and her best friend Noah. How could she possibly bring the shadow of Julian Croft into that bright, innocent world? He was a concept to Lily, a vague answer to a difficult question. A father who lived very far away. To introduce him now, a dying stranger full of ghosts, seemed like a cruel and selfish act. That evening, after she'd tucked Lily into bed, she poured herself a glass of wine and sat in the quiet of her library. Alistair Finch's voice echoed in her memory, his advice always cautious, always centered on protection. Build walls, Emma. Strong ones. She had. Her life was a fortress of peace and stability, built brick by brick from the wreckage of her marriage. Julian's request was a cannonball aimed at those walls. Yet as the hours passed, a more complex feeling began to surface beneath the anger. She thought about the night of the gala. She remembered the cold, crystalline fury that had fueled her. It had been necessary. It had been righteous. But was that anger still serving her? Or was it now a different kind of cage, one of her own making? She walked upstairs and stood in the doorway of Lily's room. Her daughter was asleep, her small chest rising and falling rhythmically, a stuffed bunny clutched in her arms. One day, Lily would be old enough to understand the whole story. She would search for her father's name online and find the articles, the scandal, the spectacular fall from grace. What would she think of her mother then? Would she see a protector? Or would she see a gatekeeper who had denied her a final chance to know a part of herself? The decision she had to make wasn't about Julian. He was a dying man who had made his bed and was now forced to lie in it. This wasn't about forgiveness for him, because what he had done was in many ways unforgivable. This was about the woman Emma wanted to be, and the mother she needed to be for Lily. It was about closing the final chapter, not with a slam of the book, but with a quiet, deliberate turning of the page. It was about ensuring that no shadow, not even Julian's, could hold any power over them, ever again. She thought of the raw, consuming hatred she had felt in the months after the betrayal. It had been an engine, but a toxic one. Over the years, she had starved it, replacing it with purpose and love for her child. Letting Julian see Lily wasn't an act of charity towards him. It was the ultimate act of indifference to his power. It was a demonstration that he was so far removed from their lives that his presence for one controlled afternoon could do no lasting harm. It was the final assertion of her own strength. With a deep sigh that seemed to release the last vestiges of a 5-year-old war, she walked back to her office. She picked up the phone and dialed Daniel Carter. He answered on the first ring, his voice anxious. "Daniel," she said, her voice steady and clear, devoid of anger or pity. "Find a neutral private location, a medical suite perhaps. My security will need to clear it first. We will be there for 1 hour, no more. Tell Julian he can see his daughter." The chosen location was a private suite at a discreet medical concierge facility in Midtown, a place of hushed corridors and expensive anonymous art. It was a non-place belonging to no one, heavy with the sterile scent of antiseptic and unspoken grief. Emma had chosen it for its neutrality. It was not her home, and it was not his past. It was simply a room where a final act could play out under the watchful, unobtrusive eyes of her security team stationed down the hall. She held Lily's small hand as they entered. Lily, dressed in a simple blue dress, looked around with wide, curious eyes, clutching a picture book to her chest. "Is this a doctor's office, Mummy?" she whispered. "It's just a quiet place to meet someone." Emma answered softly, her voice a calm anchor in the tense silence. Julian was already there, seated in an armchair near the window. The sight of him was a physical shock. The 5 years and the aggressive illness had stripped him bare. The arrogant, charismatic titan who had commanded boardrooms and galas was gone, replaced by a frail, gaunt stranger. His expensive suit hung loosely on his skeletal frame, and his once sharp face was sallow and sunken. The only recognizable feature was the piercing intelligence that still burned in his eyes, now shadowed by pain and a profound, bottomless regret. He struggled to his feet as they entered, a flicker of his old pride, warring with his body's weakness. His eyes met Emma's, and in that single glance, an entire history of love, ambition, betrayal, and ruin passed between them. There was no anger left in her, only a vast, desolate pity. "Emma." He rasped, his voice thin. She simply nodded. "Julian." His gaze then fell upon Lily, who was peeking out from behind her mother's leg. A look of pure, unadulterated wonder transformed his face. It was the awe of a man witnessing a miracle he had no right to see. He sank back into his chair, a concession to his frailty. "Hello, Lillian," he said softly. Emma gave her daughter a gentle nudge. "Lily, this is Julian. He's your father." Lily took a hesitant step forward. She looked from the man in the chair to her mother, seeking reassurance. Emma gave a small, encouraging smile. Lily walked closer and held out her picture book. "It's about a bear who gets lost," she offered. A tear traced a path down Julian's hollowed cheek. He wiped it away with a trembling hand. "I'd like that," he said. He patted the space on the floor beside his chair. For the next 45 minutes, Emma stood by the window, a silent observer as her daughter sat on the floor and narrated the story of the lost bear to the father she had never known. Lily, with the unburdened innocence of a child, was simply sharing her world. Julian listened with an intensity that was almost painful to watch, his eyes never leaving her, memorizing the shape of her face, the sound of her voice, the way her hair fell across her forehead. He was a starving man, being granted a final feast for his soul. When the book was finished, he reached into a bag beside his chair and pulled out a small, simply wrapped gift. It was a wooden music box. He showed Lily how to turn the crank, and a gentle, sweet melody filled the room. "It's for you," he whispered, "so you'll have a little music." As the hour drew to a close, a discreet knock came from the door Emma's security head. It was time. Emma walked over and gently touched Lily's shoulder. "We have to go now, sweetie." Lily looked at Julian. "Bye-bye," she said, as easily as if she were leaving a playground. Julian's composure finally broke. He covered his face with his hands, his shoulders shaking with silent sobs. Emma stood for a moment, then leaned down and spoke, her voice low and devoid of malice. "She's happy, Julian. She is loved, and she is safe. You can let go knowing that." He looked up, his eyes red-rimmed but clear. "Thank you, Emma," he whispered. It was an absolution, an acknowledgement, a final concession. "Thank you." Emma took Lily's hand and walked out of the room without looking back, leaving the ghost of her past to face his end alone. As the door clicked shut behind them, she felt the last chain to her old life fall away. Not with a crash, but with a quiet, final peace. And so the king was dethroned, not by a rival in the boardroom, but by the queen he left forgotten in his own home. Emma Vance proved that the most powerful revenge isn't loud and destructive, but quiet, strategic, and utterly devastating. She didn't just leave her husband. She reclaimed her story, her power, and her future, all in one unforgettable night. What do you think? Was Emma's public unveiling an act of perfect justice or a step too far? What would you have done in her position? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. We read every single one. If you were captivated by this story of strength and consequence, please hit that like button. It really helps our channel grow. Share this video with someone who needs a reminder that they are more powerful than they think. And most importantly, subscribe and ring that notification bell so you never miss another story where the underestimated finally get their day. Thank you for listening.